Oh, hello, viewers. This is Jason Lee reading The Clinic by Paul G. Brett, Chapter 4. Jane and I were quite excited at the thought of seeing Bishop Knightsbridge again, and in Thrupsfield this time. It was certainly a coup for the village, and I was expecting a large congregation. The choir washed their surplices, and the flower ladies excelled themselves, with some rather early autumnal arrangements beside the altar, in the lady chapel by the organ, in the font, and on some of the more prominent window sills, and we put out our best white altar frontals and hangings. The previous weekend a men's working party had given the building a late, very late spring clean. They had been persuaded to turn up by the hint that 2 hours' work in the church might be followed by 2 hours in the Gourd and Worm, our curiously named local pub. It reminded me of the story of Jonah in the Old Testament, a comfort to start with, that is, until the following morning. There'd be lunch there and at least the first round on the house. Another group cut the grass and trimmed the hedge along the road. To be truthful, I did not think all this was necessary, but I suppose they wanted to make a good impression, and I had used the visit secretly, I admit, more as the occasion for tidying the place up than the reason for it. It was our patronal festival, after all. Some of these words I don't know how to pronounce them. He arrived with a flourish. His car was a decent-sized Renault with quite a powerful engine and automatic transmission, and there was an illuminated diocesan crest on the roof. It looked more like the car belonged to the mayor or the chairman of the county council than a Christian pastor, but it got him through the throng of other cars and into the reserved space near the tower, where the hearses used to stop. At least he didn't come in the Range Rover. Holloway, he said as he smoothed his greying hair with one hand and stretched out the other in greeting. Good to see you again, and to come out into the country. So he had not forgotten. I was delighted. Now tell me, went on as we sat in the vestry before the service, what sort of people have you got here? Well, I adopted as thoughtful a look as I could. We've got farmers and some commuters and people who work in the offices near the cathedral, and the usual number of retired folk. Not many young people, I'm afraid. You'll find them friendly, though. They were very put out over my predecessor, but I'm sure I've been briefed about all that. I have, he said gravely. I shall refer to it reassuringly in my sermon, if I may. Of course, Bishop, I'm sure it would be very much appreciated. Any specially interesting people, landed gentry, aristocrats? No one like that. There are some of those and one or two titled people in Witherbrook, but they don't come here. As we processed in, I was stunned to see Amanda sitting near the back with her mother beside her. Ken was of course not with them. Why was she here? I remembered with regret our encounter in the hospital. After his words of introduction, Bishop Rupert's sermon turned to this usual stuff about the Virgin Mary and patronal festivals, and then launched into a discussion of the sanctity of human life. Fair enough in regard to suicide, I thought. We should not lightly take a life, our own or anyone else's, but he made no mention of the causes of the despair that led some unfortunates to end it all in such a tragic fashion, and did not mention the informed desire to end life with dignity at a time of one's own choosing. To my mind this was a serious omission, but maybe it would have been too much all at the same time. In due course he turned to the beginning of life. Artificial interference in the God-given joys of reproduction was an example of hubris on the part of humankind. Did you think our people would know what that meant? The Blessed Virgin had been the very model of humility and acceptance. I could sense a frown forming and beginning to run up and down the pews. Was that what he thought was the place for women? Not content with that, he went on to condemn those artificial methods which involved the creation of life in a test tube and the subsequent destruction of unwanted embryos. Our farmers assisted reproduction in artificial ways every year and thought nothing of it. By then the frown was turning into suppressed anger. Those to whom God had not granted the gift of childbirth, he was saying with great authority, need only remember that our Lord himself was childless. Ours it is to accept the divine will with humility. At that moment, to my horror, I saw Amanda get up out of her seat and march towards the pulpit. Reverend, she shouted, you're a cruel bastard. You don't know what you're talking of. How many kids you got then? 4, I heard, and I've got none, and not for want of trying. The church wardens were by now closing in on her with a glint in their eyes. It was their duty to keep order in divine service, and here at last was a chance to do it. Come on now, Miss Amanda. Leave me alone, you bugger off, bishop, Pharisee, hypocrite. My first reaction was one of amazement that she knew about those Jewish theologians. Something must have rubbed off from her days in the Sunday school, I supposed. She had been in the Sunday school. But I quickly pulled myself together and realized that this was a shocking interruption and most discourteous to our guest. Obscene words of that sort had no place in public worship. I looked up anxiously at the pulpit. I'm so sorry, friends, he was saying. My words seem to have been misunderstood, even to have caused some offence for which I am truly penitent. I've been talking about the grace of humility that accepts what life brings and does not turn to despair, the sort of despair that leads to death. But let us keep a moment of silence now, as we search our consciences and put the future into the hands of a loving God. It had been a disaster in the vestry afterwards. I whispered to him that it was Peter Ladbroke, not James. Oh, silly mistake, thanks for putting me right. Over lunch his wife had unfortunately or perhaps fortunately been unable to come with him. We inevitably went over the episode in detail, and I told him something of Amanda's situation. I wanted him to explain his views more fully, as I would have to pick up the pieces in the village, and I needed to know his arguments in detail. He seemed, however, to keep putting it off. And tell me about your family, he said, smiling at Jane. We've one daughter, she told him, Sam. She's grown up now. We don't see her a lot. She's a good girl, really. I believe you have a large family. Indeed, all daughters. They were with us at Glyndebourne, as you may remember. 3 of them are married and with 5 grandchildren. We don't hang about in our family, he added with a laugh. Hope you like that chapter. Episodes, I'll be reading more soon. This is Paul G. Brett, Amazon KDP, The Clinic.